Thank you, Richard. So before I hand the microphone over to our program directors, there's a couple things I wanted to mention. You'll notice that today our newly elected vice president for the organization is not here today, and that is because she is at home helping take care of her brand new grandbaby. So what was that, Thursday night? Thursday night, the daughter had a C-section, and now she's a brand new again grandbaby. And Kanan Christopher is the name. All right. The other announcement I had is I would like for everybody to give a rousing happy birthday to Miss Anita Romanowski. Should we embarrass her by singing to her? All right. Are you ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Anita. Happy birthday to you. All right. Welcome. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, you want to do this together? Okay, come on up. Come on. We're going to embarrass you both. This is Roxanne and Ron, who are our co-chairs for program directors. These are the individuals who are taking over this year and making sure that we have a blast here at the center. Here you go.
Thank you. I'm glad you didn't make me sing because, well, I'm very happy to be introducing for the first time Jeffrey Schesnol, and he'll be talking about the Humanist celebrations and blessings, and he also has some materials up front that he'd like for anybody to take before they go home. And just a brief bio, he has worked at the Arizona Jewish Historical Society for 5 years as project manager, curator of exhibits, and associate director. He is an IISHJ. I should have asked what that is. Okay. Rabbinic candidate, an ordained madrik, or a spiritual guide, endorsed AHA celebrant, and project manager professional. Jeffrey is the ceremonial and spiritual leader of Adam Congregation or Adam, I'm so sorry, I should have really reviewed this with you. Congregation for Humanistic Judaism in Phoenix, and a life cycle counselor. And I'm sorry I butchered that part. Oh, you have it.
Thank you, Roxanne. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I am Jeffrey Schesnol. Don't worry about pronouncing that. It took me till I was about 22 before I could say it correctly. It's a bit of a mouthful. My background includes, in a former life, being involved in the home decor industry. Did a lot of travel to and from Asia, and came here to Arizona almost 10 years ago, planning to retire. But evidently I lack the retirement gene, and as a result got involved in something my maternal grandfather encouraged me to do from the time I was age 3. So I finally got around to it, and I spent a lot of time in getting involved in the Jewish community and in the humanistic community, both in the Phoenix area as well as on the national scene. So I was described as being an IISHJ rabbinic candidate. That stands for International Institute of Secular and Humanistic Judaism. So a lot of people don't understand how you can be Jewish and how you can be secular, or how you can be Jewish and be humanistic and not, quote, religious, unquote. And the reality is is that Judaism is a bit of an odd duck when it comes to an easy, straight definition, because people don't know if it's a religion, they don't know if it's a race, which it is not, although in 1933 that was the attempt to paint it that way in Europe. And people don't know if it's a culture, if it's an extended family, or exactly what to call it. So because our particular view of Judaism is to focus on what human experiences have taught us, and to extract out of Jewish literature and liturgy that which is humanistic, which is all about making the world a better place. So in Hebrew, there's a phrase that is performed, tikkun olam. Tikkun olam means repair the world. And essentially, that is our charge. As people on this planet, it's up to us to take care of ourselves, take care of each other, and to take care of the only planet we have, Mother Earth. We also have a corollary, if you will. Well, it isn't in literature as a corollary, but I've claimed it to be. Hebrew words, lo ta'amod aldam re'echa, which means do not stand idly by. If you see injustice, if you see something that is dangerous, if you see something that is reprehensible, it is your duty to try and do something about it. Now, that's not to say that in New York City, if somebody's being mugged on the subway, you inject yourself into the altercation, but you do try and get a cop to help, or you do what you can to help the situation. Those values are very humanistic values. And rather than being involved in a relationship that is supposed to be a two-way relationship with whatever anyone describes or defines as God, because it's hard to get two people to agree on a good definition these days. So whatever that might be, instead, we do know that we have a two-way conversation when we're talking to each other. And sometimes that conversation can be very civil, it can be an agreement, and sometimes there may be discourse and we're not in agreement, and unfortunately sometimes it gets to be rather uncivil, which some of our friends in Washington are finding more and more difficult these days to do, but maybe that will and maybe that won't change. Here in Arizona, we're lucky to have a brand new senator, Kristen Sinema, who, whether Kristen identifies directly as a humanist, politically she's currently identified as unaffiliated with any church. But she has spoken to groups about her connection as a humanist. She is also very, very pro efforts to cross the aisle and reach compromise, which is not a dirty word. It's the way we can get together and we can actually understand one another for what our needs are. And if you really do have a discussion that leads to an understanding, then that creates really a bond that we can all enjoy and benefit from. So anything we can do that improves that kind of dialogue, then we're advancing that kind of discourse, that kind of discussion, that kind of, if it has to be an argument. But we can come to an agreement at least that we each have a right to our own opinions. We each have a right to try and understand our perspective, and then, because everyone has it right, we owe it to the other person to do likewise, to understand theirs. So I am an ordained madrich, and Jewish people take that throaty, guttural sound very literally. It's almost like you're kind of coughing. When I was trying to use that word in a voice recognition on my phone, Madri came out mad Greek. So, whether you choose to identify me as a mad Greek or as a Madri, it's up to you. But I do like Greek food. All of that being said, leads me to what we're going to talk about today, and I hope we'll have some dialogue. I deliberately did not prepare a PowerPoint presentation. I would like to hear your thoughts and your feelings as you're experiencing my thoughts and my feelings. So one of the first questions I have is, how long has this organization been around? How long has this Humanists of Greater Phoenix been around?
Over 40 years.
Over 40 years. So in your infancy, was there hostility to your group, or was there acceptance? What was your experience?
I don't think we've experienced much hostility yet. We've had some kids throw rocks through the windows, but I don't think they really did that because we're humans. Just because they're kids.
Oh.
But no, as far as I know, we don't really get much hostility yet.
So why do you say yet? Are you anticipating?
We plan on taking our next step is to make sure that humanism as it is understood by organizations being spread all throughout the valley as fast and as hard as we possibly can. And I would not be surprised if we get some pushback from the religious communities. I'm trying to speak loudly. So my anticipation is that could potentially cause us to have some pushback, but I don't know that it will happen. I think we need to consider the possibilities and try to decide how we're going to respond to that when it happens. My intent, if I have the opportunity to do so, will be to go into churches, including churches that are hostile to non-theistic people, and try to present this is what humanism actually is, not what you've been told, and see what comes of that. So I haven't decided to buy a bulletproof vest yet or not, but we'll see.
So
I would add it would
yes.
challenging the status quo, right? Really making people think and challenging what they believe.
So often humanism gets confused with atheism. And the term atheist, when it comes to political elections, is the lowest level of people's willing to check that ballot box for a person who is a declared atheist. Even at the height of Islamophobia, Muslims ranked higher than atheists.
I think I read recently somewhere where declared atheism is moving up in the ranks,
Oh.
and I think it's harder now for a Muslim. I remember reading this statistic recently.
Oh.
One out of every 5 people is non-religious at this point. And in the millennials, it's even higher. It's like a third.
So that was my next question. I look around the room, and I am a kindred spirit with you. I'm also in your wheelhouse in terms of philosophically and in terms of connection, but we're all, by and large, in the older age groups. So the younger people in America are more and more secular. So they're not in this room. There's a handful of some younger people, and one's sitting right here.
I turned 40 next month.
turned 40. So you're not a millennial. Not a millennial. Okay. But it is true that the younger people are less and less affiliated and more secular. And that need is something that we all need to talk about and talk to people who have that kind of a belief. Now, if they do, what else is it, because they're not here this morning by and large, what else is there that we do or say that they can't do or say on their campus, at college, or in a library, or so on? Richard?
Wanted to address the first part first. Part of the reason why the younger crowd that we do actually have in this organization is not here this morning, they don't like getting up early on Sunday morning. No, I'm really serious. We do have some discussion groups, and we do have younger people that come to discussion groups, and they are awesome. They're absolutely awesome. They have some wonderful ideas and some great things to talk about. As far as answering the question you just asked, I think I'll let somebody else answer that one.
So, hi, I'm actually in high school right now, so I get to deal with all of this fun stuff all the time. So, thank you. I'm at Mountain View right now, and it is very much a Mormon school. We have the majority population has, they go to seminary and everything. Do I need to stand up? That'd be helpful, okay. So, we have a seminary class, so about half the student body population goes to a seminary class where they talk about their religion and everything. And then we have a huge population of Catholic people. But then I have so many friends who are atheists and secular, but we are not able to talk because we will get shut down or harassed or exiled out of our groups that we're in. So I have just been like an accepted Mormon. I get invited to a whole bunch of Mormon activities. I've been invited to their state dances, to a whole bunch of their stuff because they all think I'm Mormon and they don't want to see any other side. And when they find out that I am an atheist or that I'm secular or I'm a humanist, they go, okay, I was not expecting that from you. I know that they're very aggressive. So there's just a really bad picture painted of the secular community in today's schools.
Thank you. So we're all familiar with the term atheist. And we're probably all familiar with the term agnostic. You know, that I don't know. I would submit another possible description would be agnostic. Agnostic means it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter. If we want to be better people to each other, to our families, to our community, and we're doing it through serving one another, then what does it matter whether or not God, fill in your own description or definition, we're doing good things, we're doing good works, we're performing tikkun olam, we're repairing the world, making the world a better place. There's a hand up in the back.
It makes a huge difference. Our species spends hundreds of millions of man-hours and countless billions of dollars a year pursuing belief in the supernatural. And the consequences of that belief is horrendous. Look at the lives of women in many profoundly religious countries. Look at all of the science denial that takes place as a result of religion, everything from anti-vaxxers to anti-climate. Anytime one holds something to be true that is not true, there's always a cost, even if the cost is only the truth. But the reality is the truth is everything. We can't afford as a species to do such profound damage to ourselves believing in stuff that's not true.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a hand up over here.
I identify myself as a Christian humanist. And the reason I do that is I believe that Jesus Christ was 100% human, albeit a highly evolved human being. But I believe what he taught, but as a human, not as some kind of superhuman, but an evolved human. I believe in the evolution of man. And I believe that he wasn't the only one that is of a higher human evolution. I think we have many. We had Mahatma Gandhi. We have the Dalai Lama. We have people like Martin Luther King. We could account them. They are. We have to admit those people have something more than the average person has, and it's a matter of human evolution. Jesus Christ was a man. He was a rabbi. He was a Jew. He did not die on the cross. Now, I've studied this, but I believe what he taught was very human. I think he understood human nature. And so I'm a humanist, and it may sound like an oxymoron, but I'm a Christian humanist.
So I think perhaps I wasn't clear when I said it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me about how I behave, whether my ethics are in tested human experience or divinely inspired. The fact that I behave the way I behave, the way that you behave the way you behave, it doesn't matter what your belief is, if it involves the supernatural or doesn't. What you as a human being does matter is that you act according to your own conscience, according to ethical behavior, according to what makes for a good person compared to another person who may profess a strong belief but doesn't behave in an ethical manner. Greg Epstein's book, Good Without God, goes into many detailed examples of how people can be good without God. If you want to be good without God, then it doesn't matter if there is or isn't a God. It literally doesn't make a difference. Now, the way you describe it in terms of mattering the way people are behaving toward other people absolutely matters. You're absolutely right, it does. Intolerance, treating people poorly, denying the rights and liberties of people because of a religious mantra. That doesn't hold true in terms of our connection of how we're going to treat one another as fellow human beings.
I would say it's really important what we're teaching our kids, number one. And number two, the interesting thing about religion is that all the good things that religion do are inherently humanistic. You know, feeding the poor or any of the charitable works that charities do, they have usurped humanism and called it religion, which it really is not. So this is where I think telling the truth is really important. I'll just leave it there.
Okay. So is there a hand up way back? Yes. Okay, hold. How about up closer to the front? This man in the striped sweater.
Can I talk? Okay. I just wanted to amplify what this gentleman was saying here. I think that we need to find common ground with people, and I think that most people will find, things that we hold in common, how we want to help each other, and many people get involved in religious life because they have a desire to improve and to heal the world. And the dogma is just sort of like, well, okay, and they buy it just because everybody else around them is buying it. But in my view, I will accept anybody's ideas of what the world is, and I don't care what kind of crazy, weird cosmology you believe in, as long as you don't use that belief to justify evil, bad behavior. Okay? I don't care why somebody's doing good. I care that they're doing good, and I want to acknowledge that. Okay? And if they're doing bad, then I will want to challenge them and go, you really want to be doing bad, you know? And so I think that's, if we keep finding common ground and saying, look, what is it that they are doing that we can applaud and that we can support, let's do that.
Good point.
I'm going to use the mic for just a minute and say that my problem with religion and God is the belief that there's an intelligent being in the sky determining morals and values for us human beings, and those religions are based on dogma and unwilling to change, and because of that, we are stuck in our problems.
Yeah, we have our own annual celebration to our, what we call our deity, which would be the flying spaghetti monster. May you be touched by his noodly appendages. And it's good to have something to celebrate. And a lot of religious people just have something to celebrate, whether they believe it or not.
True. Which is a perfect segue to conversation about celebration. Thank you. So, human beings are social. Please, please.
Hi, everybody. You know, these discussions have really, I feel like it's challenged my own thoughts. And I've got 2 kids, so what you talked about living and being raised here is very relevant. And so I think about those experiences, and I think about how my kids are 11 and 9. We don't obviously go to church, but many of my children's friends are very involved within their community. All sorts of ceremonies, traditions, practices, events, and like you, they've gone to different kind of Mormon things, like, I don't even know. But, you know, activities after school in the evenings. And the thing I try to kind of distill it down for my children is, you know, they'll come home from school sometimes and say, oh, well, this kid's Mormon. And I'm like, okay, well, the first thing I try to say to them is, well, how do they treat you? Well, they treat me well. I'm like, okay. Well, then that's what matters, right? I think when we boil it down is, you know, someone else may have their own inclinations or opinions or perspective, but if we can all just deduce it, like just reduce it down to, if I'm treating you well with my values, wherever that comes from, right? And likewise, someone else is treating you well, then that's how we should be, at least that's how I want my kids to think about it. In terms of, like, you know, events and ceremonies, I mean, this is my first time here, so nice to meet everybody. I woke up early, I played tennis, I rushed back here. My wife was still in bed, so when I called her, and she was like, oh, I'm not ready to go, I'm like, well, I'm just gonna come. I don't know how that's gonna turn out when I get home. You know, but yeah. But I think one of the things, at least I'm trying to look for, is, you know, when I do see these other, my friends, my kids' friends, right? One had to move. He was Mormon, and we were there to help them put their stuff in their U-Haul. I have never seen a U-Haul get packed up so fast. You know, like literally 35, 45 minutes, there was this entire crew of those from their community and their church that helped them through this very difficult time, and they packed up, and I was looking at that. That would have taken me like 2 weekends, and it took them hours. So that made me think, do I have people in my life that would help me move? Do we have that kind of support system? Do we have those similar traditions or you know, ceremonies where I may still feel some, you know, tickle, right? Spiritually, internally, mentally, that someone else may interpret as some being. I just say scientifically, there's probably some kind of, you know, synapses and chemicals going off, and boy, that felt good. right? So that's kind of my thing. I enjoy the discussion. I find it very valuable, and I would like to hear more. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. I am planning to move, and some of these people have come all the way up to North Scottsdale to help me start packing. But anyway, I have been reading a copy of the Old Testament, and I gotta tell you, it is horrible. It's disgusting. People killing people, killing people by the thousands because God asked them to, taking over communities, subjugation of women, a God who seems to be schizophrenic. He's always asking for sacrifices, for this happened, your son did this, kill him. And he seems to be forgetful. This is the God that is leading these people. I don't understand how people can swallow this whole and believe it. And now a lot of religions are, I believe, emulating it. That's it.
So it's obvious that our tent is big enough that there can be a whole variety of different concepts and ideas that we're willing to accept, we're tolerant. Our common denominator is our humanity, and we care about one another. So your reference to the Old Testament, Rabbi Sherwin Wein, who is the founder of humanistic Judaism, said, quote, given his behavior in the stories in the Old Testament, it's really hard to understand God's good reputation, unquote.
I just want to add that the reason I'm reading it is kind of a know thy enemy type attitude.
Keep your enemies closer. Yeah. Yeah. So, how many of you would describe yourself, in part or wholly, as spiritual but not religious? I'd say it's about half the room. Okay. You make that determination as to what your spirituality is. So one of the things that I think involves spirituality is celebration. It is about coming together and having a purpose for gathering that's worth making a big deal about. And when you look at why people come together, you have reasons such as commemorations, like emancipation, accomplishment, memorial, a historical event, military victories, or the anniversary of a role model. Darwin Day is coming up. It's February 12th, celebrated on February 10th here. There are seasonal opportunities for celebration, whether they are directly connected to the calendar, to equinoxes, to the seasons, spring and summer, winter and fall. And there are life cycle events that we come together to celebrate, like birth, coming of age, educational achievement, coupling, and then sometimes uncoupling, aging, and the biggie, ultimately, death. So we're all born, and we all die. So one of the things that brings people together, and one of the reasons one of the reasons, is people looking for explanations, people looking for rationale, people looking for a way of coping. And there are things that affect people more deeply than others. Death happens to be one of the most profound because it is loss that is forever. So going back into as far as history, forget recorded history, as the stories were passed on and then ultimately recorded, death rituals have been a very important part of almost every society. So how you treat death, that varies, of course, enormously. Now, there are those people that say, and unfortunately, a good friend of mine died recently. His wife said, well, now he's home with Jesus. And that was her coping mechanism. I perform funerals and memorials. We perform them as a celebration of life. So we focus on what this person meant to us. How did we relate to them, and how important was their life? Whether we choose to have it or not, we have memory. That makes us quite distinct in the animal kingdom. Memory, and memory of people who have touched our lives, is a very special, profound kind of human experience. There's a story, I use this often at funerals, of some people observing a harbor, and there was a ship about to sail that was being readied for its first voyage. And someone broke a bottle of champagne on its bow, and people were cheering, and the ship slowly backed out of the slip to make its maiden voyage. And no one was paying attention on the other side of the harbor to a ship that was just returning from a voyage. It had just come back. And it was out to sea for a very long time, but it came back laden with treasures and experiences and travels and so forth. When we're celebrating a person's life, that's the ship that's coming into the harbor. That's the ship that's having gone out and accomplished. The ship that weathered the storms. The ship that came back having had all of these stories worth recounting and telling. The ship that hasn't left the harbor yet hasn't experienced anything yet. That's the metaphor for birth, and the ship returning to the harbor for death. So we have to focus. We have to keep those things in mind. Celebrations of important things that go on in our lives, our own and those of people that we care about, are very important. They can be celebrated without being necessarily connected to God, or however you define it. You can celebrate in human terms. So I would suggest to you that celebration is a crucial element part of human gathering. You know, we've heard about hunters and gatherers and so on. Well, we gather also as humans, we gather together. And we have this socialization that goes on, that we yearn to do things with other people. There are things we do alone, but aren't most of the things we do more fun when we can do them with others? So it's more experiential. It's more interactive. It's more meaningful in many respects. Those opportunities to celebrate can be vested in the human experience. It's very hard to try and create a new tradition or ritual. Tradition, literally by its definition, are things that have happened before. They happened before. They happened repeatedly. It was hard for a lot of people to try and understand why Fiddler on the Roof was such a popular play and movie about an Eastern European Jewish experience. After all, most of the people who saw it had no identity to that connection. Jews represent only about 1.7% of the American population, 0.2% of the global population. Why would a story going on about Eastern European Jews resonate? Because the values that were recounted in the story were about human experiences, and people were able to identify with them. And tradition is basically one of the things that helps us have our connections to our past, our connections to each other, our connections to values, our connections to important elements that guide us on our pathway in life. So there are other ways that people can make those connections more and more meaningful. So let's take a holiday. So we just celebrated New Year's, right? So Happy New Year. Happy New Year. And of course, you know, there are many New Years. There are the calendar New Years, and there are agricultural New Years, and there are fiscal New Years, and there's the school New Year. So obviously there are a lot of different New Years. We just celebrated a New Year. So what are we doing? Are we just marking time, you know, through an arithmetic calculation? Or are we actually celebrating accomplishment, achievement, experiences, relationships? Those are the things that make those kinds of events more meaningful when you do that. Now, if we wanted to create some entirely new kind of a calendar event and it wasn't connected to some sort of a familiar relationship for most people, it would be a very difficult thing to do. If I wanted to make January 14th a really important day of the year, because I happen to have been here talking, who else would care? Well, I know you all care because you appreciate it and you're here and you got out of bed early to be here. But there has to be some connection. There has to be some way of attaching it. There has to be some way of interpreting it or reinterpreting or reimagining what any given day or event might be. So when there are circumstances, let's talk about reinvention for a second. In the fall, on the 11th of November, way back when I was a little kid, that day was called, tell me, Armistice Day. It wasn't called Veterans Day. Armistice Day, celebrating
the resignation of hostility, and the cessation of hostilities, technically.
in World War I.
The
Yeah,
day of
19.
the month.
So that was a very long time, 102 years ago, or actually 1918. So really, this past year was the 100th anniversary of the conclusion of World War I. I was not there, but I'm told it was a big deal. Well, along the way, Armistice Day got reinterpreted because veterans of all wars were going to be recognized, and it got changed to Veterans Day. That was a connection that was easy to reinterpret because you had an element there to connect it. There are other things that go on. So there are a lot of holidays are connected to agrarian things that have gone on. So in in ancient times, there was a holiday among Semitic people that celebrated the first wheat harvest. And in Hebrew, it was called Chag HaMatzot. There also was a holiday for the first birthing of lambs in the spring, and that was called Chag HaPesach. Along the way, rabbinic leadership of Jewish people wanting to infuse a supernatural element because their authority was vested in supernatural connection. They were the special communicators with that supernatural. It got changed to Passover. And a whole story in biblical Leviticus, and biblical Exodus, got developed about Jews being part of a tribal connection in Egypt held in slavery, and they were released from slavery and then went into the desert and wandered, and you know the rest of the story. So that was a technique where they could take where people were already celebrating something that was connected to their lives, because 2,000 years ago we were an agrarian society. They took something that was familiar and they layered in another interpretation. The point being, we as humanists have a challenge of layering in secular connections to our lives, and I would suggest to you that when and where the opportunity presents itself, we make that connection to something that people are already familiar with and doing, and that we give it some new meaning. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. But if we layer in a plausible, reasonable, rational explanation, then people will say, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, I understand that. That has a connection. So in Judaism, the beginning of the Hebrew calendar year occurs in what is the Gregorian calendar's fall. And it's called Rosh Hashanah, head of the year. But it isn't like New Year's in terms of January 1st. It's New Year's in terms of it's a new beginning. It's an opportunity to wipe the slate clean and to make a better person in the coming year of one's self than they were in the past year. Now, there's a whole series of rituals and traditions that are connected to that process, but that's really the meaning of that holiday. And so it fits with the idea of new beginnings. Now, people don't go around making New Year's resolutions. They don't join health clubs that they only go to for 6 weeks and then drop out. But instead, go to people who they have perhaps wronged and say, I'm sorry I did that. I was not being thoughtful. I apologize. Will you accept my apology? Now, in Jewish tradition, you have 7 times that you can do that, and if you're still not granted an apology, then you have tried sufficiently to make your amends, and so forth. So by and large, I would suggest most of us, unless we have horribly wronged another individual, certainly long before 7 times of apology, just the recognition that you are sorry that you made them feel badly. Not sorry you got caught. Not sorry, not sorry that you've been called out on it, but sorry truly because they don't feel good about it. Now, you may be sorry for the relationship that needs to be mended, and that's genuine, and that's to be shared. So certainly in therapy, when you talk to a person who is trying to get a hold of their own feelings, they need to make sure they communicate with the other person that they don't feel good about what they did. I did something, I feel badly about it, I didn't understand you, I didn't consider your feelings, and so forth. So that's an important element. So you layer that into a particular event, and then it makes sense. So, let's take something else. Take, I don't think we have any big celebrations on Robert Ingersoll's birthday. Not to say that we shouldn't. Or Bertrand Russell. Or some great minds that have influenced us philosophically. But certainly, there are opportunities when those events coincide to get their interpretation to be a more humanistic understanding of what it is. So because of that, I think we should deliberately make an effort to try and celebrate together, to deliberately say, this is an important event and it has these other components that makes it even more relevant for us today than it did perhaps for our ancestors in the past. Let's talk about being thankful. Let's talk about blessings. So I was once chastised for using the word blessing in a Sabbath Shabbat service 27 times. But if we are blessed to have bread on the table by the work of the people who did the harvesting of the grain and made it into bread, if we are blessed to have the fruit of the vine, and really thankful for that, it doesn't have to, but we're so accustomed to blessings being supernatural that one has to prostrate themselves before a God to express the feeling of thankfulness. But you don't. You can be thankful for your neighbor. You can be thankful for your spouse. You can be thankful for your children. You can be thankful for your community. You're still thankful. You can be blessed by this community. Blessed in terms of having their camaraderie, having their support, helping you pack up that U-Haul. Yes, you can actually pack a U-Haul in an afternoon without it necessarily being a religious experience. So what I'd like to recommend or share is that we find those opportunities to express our thankfulness for the things, the little things, the little things. So in Judaism, in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, there are reported to be 613 commandments or laws. Most of them involve very small recognitions of things in everyday life. I'm thankful for getting up in the morning. I got up on the right side of the dirt. Now, one that doesn't sit well, I'm thankful for having made me a man and not a woman. Doesn't play well. Thankful for seeing a rainbow. Isn't a rainbow a beautiful thing? Thankful for the rain. Thankful for being able to go to the toilet. Hard to share in mixed company.
Although legitimate.
Oh, yes, on any given day. Thankful for stop going to the toilet so frequently. Oh, that depends on what you had for New Year's Eve. The point being is we are human beings who share our time and place together. We can be thankful to one another. We can be blessed by one another. It doesn't have to be supernatural. We can celebrate together, and we should, because we are a community. We are a family, and we're all related. We're all human. Some of us a little more than others, but nonetheless, we are. So now I ask you, tell me what you want to celebrate. What's important? What's worth celebrating? What's worth being an important event or opportunity?
Hi, I just wanted to continue your thought before we move on. I'd like to express it in the sense that other believing communities do not have ownership on the vocabulary of these words, like grace, miracles, what was the word you just used? Blessings. That vocabulary is changing its meaning all the time to accommodate all of us as we progress and we evolve. They do not have ownership on these words. I love these words, but they do not mean the same thing to me as it does to the majority of other people. And I use them, and I love certain words that really can still express how I feel.
Thank you.
Along those lines of the definition of words, one of the things that really bothered me about any organized religion are the words praise and worship. And I'd just like to get your opinion on that. To me, it seems when people are saying, I praise the Lord, I worship the Lord, it's a form of idolatry.
So we certainly praise human accomplishment all the time. We have awards. Some of them are sold in trophy shops. Some of them are certificates. But we do praise human behavior, achievement frequently. The word pray, however, P-R-A-Y, not P-R-E-Y, the word pray, however, conjures up some difficulties. So when people hear that a person has been ill, you say, I'll keep you in my prayers. I'm sure you've heard that expression more than once. So because we don't pray in the same sense that a conventional religious organization would pray, we will keep you in our thoughts. We will keep you in our best possible ability to help. We'll keep you near, and so forth. Now, I think that's an element. So we can praise. We don't pray in that way. And the other word you said was worship. So we worship things all the time. So unfortunately, in our materialistic society, people worship material things that perhaps they shouldn't. It goes on all the time. They worship money. They worship their acquisitions, their house, their other possessions, and so on. But sometimes we worship another human being. You've heard of putting someone on a pedestal in that regard. So why do you put someone on a pedestal? Why would you worship them if they exhibit behavior that you want to emulate, that you find praiseworthy, that you find a positive? So it isn't an easy word to use, worship, but to say you worship an ideal, I worship the ideal of true democracy, you know, that's definitely praiseworthy and worthy of our worship. But we don't pray to it. Now, that being said, there have been efforts to make symbols of some elements within our culture such that they become sacred. So let's take the flag, the American flag. Very controversial to say what are the liberties associated with the American flag. So displaying it and so forth as a flag, that's easy. Wearing it as clothing plays well sometimes, not other times. Putting it on the floor and walking across it does not go over well in most circles. Destroying it, setting it afire, cutting it apart, definitely a no-no for the majority of people that we have all around us, even though it is just a symbol. What is it that you have to look at when you do that? Are you really trying to destroy what that symbol of bravery, courage, sustenance of an ideal, and so forth? Or are you making a statement of protest against a particular political stand and so forth? I used to proudly display the flag all the time at my house. I only display it now for veterans. I only display it as I'm showing respect for the people that I am appreciative of. I don't display it currently for praiseworthy governmental behavior. So I think we have to tread lightly on some of those subjects. Other points?
Well, I'd like to address a couple things. There are a number of us in this room that while some of us would say it's fine to use these words, and indeed the definitions of words do change, words also carry baggage, which is why a number of us in this room would not use certain words like praise or blessing or et cetera, because it does carry that baggage. But to get to the point of secular celebrations, one of the things that we mentioned is we just recently did the solstice celebration for upcoming Darwin Day. I think it was a fantastic idea to celebrate Ingersoll and Bertrand, one of my favorite philosophers. But there's something that the more science-minded of you might be interested in. It happens every year on April 12th. It is a celebration called Uri's Night. Uri's Night. Because April 12th, 1964, he was the first human in space. So, and then 20 years later, April 12th, 1984, was the very first shuttle in space. So it's a celebration of science and human and humanistic achievement. So just putting that out there. I've got more information because there is actually a worldwide celebration all around the world. And there's one here in Phoenix as well. So, kind of cool.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I wouldn't complete our conversation without a couple of points of material and literature. One is a small brochure here in which things are talked about in terms about what we believe. So I'm just going to quickly go over these. We believe in the ethical values, social justice, languages, food, music, literature, art, and traditions of the Jewish people. Human determination, empathy, and intelligence, not faith or belief in a supernatural power, is the guide to understanding. In connecting to one another and making a positive impact on the world, we celebrate humanity. Spiritual, ancestral, cultural, ethical, and educational experience replace prayer. An open, human-centered, non-religious community with no restrictions as to belief or denomination. So that's one of the things. The other is that I work at the Arizona Jewish Historical Society as the Associate Director, Curator, and Project Manager. I want to bring your attention to an upcoming series of events throughout the greater Phoenix area called Violins of Hope. Violins of Hope basically celebrates the human beings who had violins taken from them in World War II, and many of them were either lost, damaged, and they've now been restored by a violin maker in Tel Aviv, Israel, and those violins are being brought here to the valley starting on February 3rd. And it will be a series of events that are held throughout the valley over 2 months, with probably the most stirring being a concert being held up at the Scottsdale Performing Arts Center. A film on the Violins of Hope will be shown at the Jewish Historical Society downtown on February 5th, courtesy of one of our Oradam members. Thank you very much. And the opening and gateway event is on February the 3rd, Super Bowl Sunday. Go. Now talk about a celebration day. I don't know why nobody thought of that. But I can just tell you that if we continue to value our human connections, our common humanity, that we do things because they are the right thing to do. There's a Yiddish word, mensch. Mensch is a person who does the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And not because anybody's looking, not because somebody's looking over your shoulder, either cosmologically or physically, but because you know it's the right thing to do. I encourage each and every one of you, continue, strive, be a mensch. Thank you.
So I would like to invite everybody to please give a round of applause to Jeffrey. This was a fantastic talk. So to kind of continue on the theme, one of our favorite members has handed something that we should be mindful of. Humanism is a progressive life stance that, without theism or other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of humanity. That's what humanism means, and I believe that we've had a fantastic perspective on humanism, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the talk, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
That pretty much ends our segment today. Don't forget actually, what? Oh yeah. Pretty much, we got one more thing that we got to handle, because we like to do, we have a tradition here at the center. It's a fantastic tradition where we
have our own tradition that we've established in celebration of our wonderful speakers, and we mug them.
Oh, thank you. I feel proud to be mugged. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that pretty much is it for today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. There is plenty of food in the back as well. Please take some so we don't end up still stuffing our